Well, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I think it's fair to say that few books have received as much uproar upon publication as Fire and Fury did. And I think that it's become somewhat of an international political event. What do you think is the most important effect that the book has had upon the American public?
I think it's given everybody, including members of the Trump administration, permission to say what everybody already knows and understands, that this is a deeply flawed moment in American history, a problematic presidency at every level, and an alarming figure who sits in the White House.
Is there a particular message you wanted people who read the book to kind of get from reading it?
No, I wanted people to see. I mean, I had this experience, of being able to go into the White House and see this firsthand. So, as a writer, that was my only interest, and it was really not a political interest. It was a writerly interest of being able to see this, to get what I saw and what I heard, and to put it on paper and let people experience it in a way that was as close as possible to the way I experienced it.
Okay, so the book begins several weeks before the election, when Trump's campaign seemed to be failing, and you wrote that none of the members of his campaign had any faith in him. Why do you think this was?
Well, I think they knew. I mean, it is obvious who Donald Trump is. It's obvious who he is. It's obvious what he wants. The man is spectacularly transparent. And I think it was clear to everyone in his campaign, as it was clear basically to everyone in the world, that him becoming president was just about one of the least likely events to happen ever. And as a corollary to that, nobody in the campaign was prepared to have for any other outcome. So you have these people in this campaign, and they're doing what they're doing, and they're working in a presidential campaign, which is great for them, and they're making their own plans of what's going to happen. Steve Bannon is going to become the head of essentially the head of the Tea Party, and Kellyanne Conway is already negotiating with networks for a permanent on-air spot. And Jared and Ivanka are going to go from local socialites to international celebrities. And Donald Trump himself, during the campaign, I at one point I spoke to him. We did an interview, and I said, okay, what's your goal here? What's your real goal? And he said, without hesitation, that his goal was to become the most famous man in the world. And by the time the election came, he had already achieved that. So, were he to have lost, he would be the most famous man in the world, and he could blame his loss on Hillary and that it was stolen from him, and he could have had a fine old Trumpian time. But instead, he won. And I use in the book, I compare this to the movie The Producers, and in that movie there are these two crooks, producers on Broadway, have a scheme, and the scheme is that they're going to produce a play, but they're going to sell more than 100% of the interest in this play, but the play will fail. Therefore, everyone loses their money. They get to keep the extra money. It's great. But they win. The play actually succeeds because it's so terrible, so beyond belief, that people find it hilariously funny. And the play is a hit, and they go to jail. So, in a similar way, the Trump people would have been fine, all of them, if they had lost. But having won, they are all exposed. They are exposed because, number one, they know nothing. Number two, they've committed all kinds of dubious, if not illegal, acts. Number three, Donald Trump has a long history of selling apartments to Russians. Not to mention his taxes, not to mention the women, not to mention on and on and on. So Donald Trump is exposed, and you have to appreciate at this moment in time, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and every power center in America is now coming after him, wants to bring him down. So this is what he gets for being elected president.
So why do you think the public bought into the story of someone who just wanted to be the most famous man in the world?
I think that after 2 generations or so of increasing disillusionment with politics and politicians, they suddenly had the opportunity to vote for the exact opposite of that. I mean, here was a man who bears no resemblance to anything in politics. A man who has never worked in politics, a man who is unlike any politician who has ever run possibly for any office. And so that's what they voted for. Don't like politicians? Let's do the exact opposite. And I think I think you can look at that as a grand experiment. And I think actually people will come to look at that and are coming to look at this as a failed experiment, but an experiment it has been.
Okay, so I'll touch upon the 2020 election later, but do you think that those around him have more faith in him now he's been elected?
I think exactly the opposite. In fact, I mean, what this book is in effect is really about. I mean, it's not about my impressions of Donald Trump. It's about the impressions of the people around him, and that's kind of the arc of the book, from people who went in on January 20th, 2017, and I saw them. I'm speaking to them every day, and I see a process in which they go from certainty. I would say it goes from certainty to puzzlement, to confusion, to disillusionment, to incredulity, to maybe something like fear, and to the acknowledgement that he can't do the things that are necessary for a president to do. And this is not 1 or 2 or 3, this is 100% of the senior staff around him. So that becomes a kind of a moment in history. Everybody in the White House thinks this is a problem.
So who do you think is the White House insider most misunderstood by the American public?
I don't, my temptation would be to say Steve Bannon, and it's only partly. I mean, I think people I got to through this process, I got to know Steve very well, and without sharing one iota of Steve's beliefs, I came to like him a great deal, came to depend upon his insights in many instances in this book, and to really kind of revel in his level of expressiveness. I mean, he's funny, and he can look at a person in a situation, and you think, yeah, okay, he gets it. So it's a funny thing. He's full of these kind of this fundamentally, to me, abhorrent politics. And yet, believe me, if you ever get a chance to have dinner with Steve Bannon, take it. You should get him here.
Sure. Well, we'll reach out to you for his number then. Do you think that Trump will be able to put together a coherent team of advisors and supporters for 2020?
No, he can't hire anybody. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. So, virtually, most of the people who came in January a year ago are now gone. The exodus in this White House has been as great as I think any. I mean, it's at the level that happens at the end of a first term, and part of the issue is they can't really replace the people because no one will go to work in this White House because it means you'll probably have to hire a lawyer, and that's going to cost you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then B, there's this interesting thing that going to work in the White House used to be the career topper. If you work in the White House, your career is made, and that has been true about every administration, certainly in my memory. The people who have worked for this White House now leave, and they can't get jobs. They're diminished by this experience. So nobody will go into the White House. That means that now the president's two senior most advisors are a woman by the name of Hope Hicks, and she's 28 or 29, and she's a former junior level fashion PR person before she joined the Trump campaign, and a guy by the name of Stephen Miller, who a few months ago, Steve Bannon referred to as my typist. So these are the two most powerful people next to the president in the U.S. government.
What do you think the 2020 election will look like?
I don't think it will have Trump in it. I think forces are converging on Trump now that will, well, the Steve Bannon's formulation, which I fall back on because I think it's eminently reasonable, is that there's a 33 1/3% chance that he'll be impeached, a 33 1/3% chance that he will resign in the face of the 25th Amendment, which goes to the disability of a president, and a 33 1/3% chance that he will limp to the finish line, but a 0% chance that he will get another term or even that he will run for one.
Do you think the Democrats might put forward a celebrity candidate too?
I don't. I mean, I think that there will be that temptation, but again, I think this will be looked at as the great failed experiment, and we will return to some more rational basis.
So it would be a no to Oprah Winfrey then? It would be a no to Oprah Winfrey then?
I would say no, yes.
Okay. Okay. Do you think the president is incapable of carrying out his duties?
I do. I mean, let's define his duties, and that's not. I think the president is not capable of moving a significant bureaucracy, one of the most significant, one of the largest and most complicated bureaucracies on earth. There are 4 million people in the executive branch, and so the whole process of understanding, of acquiring information, understanding information, and synthesizing information is really beyond Donald Trump. I mean, he just can't do it. And even in the White House, and it's one of the central points that's discussed every day, is you have a president who doesn't read. Doesn't read literally, doesn't read anything. If it's summarized and digested down to a few sentences, he's still pushing it away. This thing, they imitate this gesture all the time. But the problem is not that he just doesn't read, but also that he doesn't listen. So how do you get information to this man? And largely the answer is you don't, or you get very little information to him.
So you think he doesn't even listen to the kind of closest advisors around him?
No. I mean, he listens. Occasionally these things get through, but then he listens to somebody else too. That's the danger. It's always the last person who spoke to him. But even speaking to him, even that's more positive, because the thing about Donald Trump is it's very hard to speak to him. He just motor mouths at you, blah, 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 blah. And so you're always the listener. You always have to give Donald Trump attention, and he gives you no attention in return.
So when Roger Stone came to speak here a couple of weeks ago, he told us that Trump likes to listen to everyone that he meets and likes to take their ideas in. Do you think there's something wrong in doing that?
I don't think it's true. I mean, I know Roger, and I've spent a considerable amount of time with him on this, and I actually kind of like Roger, but the safest rule in terms of Roger, which is not just my rule, it's everyone's rule, is the opposite of what he says is true. And I don't. I mean, Trump appears to talk to everybody, but he does talk to everyone. He just doesn't listen to anybody. And it's this constant. I mean, he will say anything. He will call up anybody, but it's all broadcast.
Okay. So, what effect do you think the Trump presidency has had upon democracy in America?
Well, it's made it pretty lively. I think it's maybe that's. I mean, maybe this is sort of good news. I mean, it's brought everyone to attention. Everyone certainly pays attention to what's going on. I mean, I don't think I've ever, at least since the 1960s, remember an electorate so attentive to every movement. Every minute of the Washington day, really. So I think that might be good news.
Okay. So do you not think that it maybe has eroded political and constitutional norms?
Not yet, I don't think. As a matter of fact, I think maybe even the opposite. It has brought those norms to attention. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, Trump goes to Washington as a man who's going to take on the town. He's going to clear the swamp. And he's a kind of New York figure in this. In New York, you can see the difference between Washington and New York. That New York is is driven by individuals. The guys who have the most money have the most power, and the people who are the most famous get the most attention. And in all, that's kind of New York life. It's a marketplace city. Washington is an institutional city. So it's not really about people. We think it is because we're voting for someone, but that's not really true. It's really about these institutions that are there to protect themselves. And that's often viewed as in some kind of anti-democratic thing. It's the permanent government, unelected people. But I think at this moment in time, we get to see that as as the other side of democracy. We've built these institutions, and these institutions are not going anywhere, and they're not going to let Donald Trump screw around with them. So Donald Trump thinks he can fire the head of the FBI and stop an investigation. Well, the only thing that happens is that he just increased the force of the investigation and its determination to get to the bottom of what's going on here. And this is so you have the courts, you have the Justice Department, you have the intelligence community. You have the media, you have the business community, everybody focused on Donald Trump, on taking down Donald Trump, on fundamentally protecting the country from what Donald Trump might do. So again, that's kind of maybe good news.
Mm-hmm. How close do you think those people are to taking him down?
I think pretty close. I mean, he's not in a good place. I mean, if you're the president of the United States in your just finishing your first year, and you have a special prosecutor coming after you, you're in significant trouble here. I mean, most administrations actually, when a special prosecutor is in place, the administration is sort of, its historic time is divided. There's the time before, and then there's the time after. And the time after the special prosecutors, I mean, you don't do anything. I mean, you're essentially a broken administration. And the special prosecutor obviously came into, was appointed 5 months after the term began.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to a slightly different question and onto the ideal of free speech, of which you're a vehement defender. In today's world of social media proliferation, how do you think we can draw distinctions between the protection of free speech whilst filtering out and stopping fake news?
I think that everybody should be identified in social media, and I think social media platforms should be held as accountable as publishers.
How do you think we can go about doing that?
No, there would be no reason not to be able to regulate social media, and no reason not to treat them as publishers. They're treated now as common carriers, which is essentially like a telephone company, and they ought to be treated as publishers, which is to say responsible. They can be held accountable by libel laws and other remedies.
So you think that Twitter, if someone posts on Twitter something that's not true, then Twitter should be held accountable for that?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, if there are damages, yes. Why not?
Sure. Okay. I think now's probably the perfect time to open up some questions from the audience, if that's okay. So if you've got a question that you'd like to ask, raise your hand and we'll try and get a microphone over to you. I see a hand went up right at the back straight away, so why don't we go over there first?
So during the election, Trump hijacked the real problem of fake news to frame lots of the American mass media as sort of Clinton shills, even though the reality is that her emails were the biggest sort of discussed problem. To what extent do you think then that the way that the American media and the way that American people consume it played a role in Trump's election?
Well, it obviously played a role, that and every election is determined to some extent by the media. There's a kind of a theory that every 4 years changes the nature of the media because some new technology comes along to influence the presidential race. I mean, the only thing, so I would say, yes, that's true, but that's a normal development. It's just part of what you have to accept, partly when you accept a free press, and partly as a vagary of the democratic process.
Should we go to the hand just over there in the aisle? Yeah, there.
You say the Trump administration is in a kind of permanent terminal crisis, but why is Donald Trump about as popular today, according to opinion polls, as he was on the day of the election? Why is so little shifting?
Well, I think the opposite is also true of that. He's the least popular president in modern memory, so he has not been at all able to expand his base. He's trapped in this. His numbers are deeply problematic, and he seems to be trapped there. Well, that's it. I mean, I would say that's dismal rather than positive for him.
But it didn't stop him winning the election.
It didn't.
Okay, should we go to the hand just over there? Yeah.
Family dynasties have been the mainstay of US politics for at least the last 5 decades. Should we have any concern, or should the world be concerned, that Don Jr. is going to has aspirations of the top job?
You know, Donald Trump is really stupid. But even Donald Trump says that his sons are stupid. So they're like a pale imitation of their father. So listen. The point about Donald Trump becoming president is apparently it's true. Anyone can become president. But these guys are really, really stupid. So I think we're okay.
See lots of hands going up now. Should we go to the hand just over there in the aisle? Yeah.
Can you talk about how you got the access to the White House? I'm guessing a lot of people would have wanted the same sort of access. How did you manage to get in?
You know, I'm not sure. The truest answer is I got this access by asking for it. And I think in a way it may be that nobody else quite asked for it. Remember the American media, when this happened, when Trump is elected, is completely becomes completely polarized against him. So he becomes the enemy. And I think that there was a sense of any effort to get close to these guys was to collaborate with them. Now, I didn't buy that. I didn't think that way. I thought, and I had no particular political axe myself. I didn't know what was going to happen here. I just knew that Donald Trump was going to be an incredible story. And if he had been, the strange guy who yet managed to be successful in some way, I was willing to write that story. And as it happened, that is not true, and he is not going to be successful. And so I wrote that story, but I was only focused on this most aberrant and peculiar figure, and I just wanted to get close to that. Technically, the functional way this happened is that I had some relationship with Trump and with people in the campaign. And I had the opportunity in December to say to Trump, I would like to come into the White House as an observer. And Trump thought I was asking for a job. And because he didn't know what people did in the White House, it was like I could have, been, deputy assistant observer. Who knows? But I said, no, I want to write a book. And he could not have been less interested in that. It was like, kind of deflated, like, oh yeah. And he kind of said, yeah, okay, sure, why not? And that really became the passport for me getting in there and staying for a long time. I was really in from January, from the end of January to the end of August, and just watching and listening.
Did you get any financial support for your investigation, or a grant? Or?
Yeah. Yes. Matter of fact, I was going to say I sure did, because it was. I immediately. I have a publisher. I write books, so I have a publisher, and as soon as it became clear that this was a possibility, and my publisher thought the way I thought. This was going to be a hell of a story. So yeah, somebody was paying the bills.
Okay, shall we go to the hand just over there? Yeah, in the check shirt.
So you referred to Trump's election and subsequent term as a failed experiment. Do you think this failed experiment would encourage or discourage populist voting in the future?
It's a super good question, Steve Bannon believes that this nationalist populist movement is an international phenomenon. It's much larger than Donald Trump. That Donald Trump is just a chapter or a facet or a passerby in this larger movement. So I think I don't know, but I think Steve may be right. But if he's right, I think that he's also right that movement is different from Donald Trump. I think the Donald Trump experiment is about electing a famous person, fundamentally regardless of his politics. Whether there continues to be a nationalist populist movement, I think, is a separate question and a more difficult question and probably a more profound question.
Should we go to the hand just over there? Yeah, just there.
What are your thoughts on Trump's ties to Russia, and will he get impeached?
Obviously, the Trump administration has had all kinds of really peculiar ties to Russia. Really, and worrisome ties, and it's extraordinarily difficult to understand what went on there, which is why it seems like a fair conclusion that there was some kind of conspiracy going on. And obviously, we know that the Russians were trying to influence the election, trying to make trouble, and Trump had a relationship with them. And so, but, at the same time, in order to prove conspiracy, you have to prove intent. Intent is always difficult to prove, but it's especially difficult to prove when the actors in the so-called conspiracy are stupid. Stupidity actually becomes a defense against conspiracy. When what you're doing is without plan, without purpose, without design, it's just random. You do it just because in the moment you thought, well, that seems like a good idea. And I think that may be the case. That may be the truer case with the Trump administration. That rings truer to me than the fact that somebody in this gang that couldn't shoot straight making a plan with Vladimir Putin to steal the U.S. election. But maybe, huh?
Should we go to the hand just there? Yeah.
I was wondering, how does Mike Pence feel about Donald Trump?
You know, this is, you got dumb and you got dumber. And even in the White House, where everyone is convinced that Donald Trump is just about as dumb as you get, then they go, but then there's Mike Pence. Oh, I don't know.
Okay, should we go to the hand just over there? Yeah.
Trump's campaign was obviously like riddled with scandals, which would have ended the career of most people. Why was the American electorate so willing to just overlook these like misogynistic scandals, and why didn't they have any effect on Trump?
Let me just ask. So this is about essentially why the pussy grabbing tape didn't bring him down. You know, I think there's one theory would be, and actually this is a Steve Bannon theory, is that the Me Too movement exists with the anger that it has and with the success that it has because it is fundamentally and ultimately about bringing Donald Trump down. That he is its greatest target because he is the greatest symbol he is the greatest harasser of our time. And I think that could be true. So the answer to that question is that it was the pussy grabbing tape was justice delayed, but not justice denied. They're coming for him.
And I should go to hand just there.
So you mentioned that people within the campaign didn't necessarily want to win, perhaps in the same way that their opponents, Democrats, did, and that they were Trump was content to be the most famous man, and Ivanka and Jared were content to just be more well-known on the international stage. So why did people within Trump's campaign engage in such dubious activities if their aim wasn't ultimately to win?
I didn't exactly get that. They engaged in the dubious activities because they weren't going to win. In other words, you know, Mike Flynn takes $45,000 from the Russians. I think the figure escapes me. And he says, in one of his people says, hey, you know, that could be a problem. You know, is this really the best thing to do? And he said, it would only be a problem if we won. And obviously we're not going to win. So I think all of these people are going about their lives as they ordinarily would. Usually when you're running for high office and running to be president, you do things in a different way because your level of exposure is so much greater. So these guys were involved in all this kind of stuff without the ordinary cautions because they had absolutely confident and had every right to be confident that they were not going to win.
Should we go to the hand just over there?
Fire and Fury has been criticized for its lack of transparency and ambiguity of some of its sourcing. The way you write sometimes gives the impression that you were privy to the deepest, innermost beliefs and convictions of people like Melania, Ivanka, and Jared, and it's a bit hard to see like how you could possibly know some of the things that you claim to do, and that opens the book up to the charge of perhaps embellishing for dramatic effect. So I'm just wondering how you'd defend your work against such criticisms.
You know, I think, and so tell me what the clapping is about. This is, okay, good enough. There is certainly, my book is not the first book that offers an inside view of the White House. And in order to get that inside view, you make a whole set of deals. And the deals are, you tell me what you know, and I will protect you. I won't say that you talk to me. So there are people on the record in my book, but there are a lot of people who I agreed, on pain of death, I would never reveal that they spoke to me. So that's the way you get this picture. And if you don't do that, you don't get this picture. So now I am not in any way maintaining in any sense that this is that the picture I'm offering is the only picture that there will be, or the last picture that there will be. It is just this in a reflection of my opportunity to be in this circumstance and talk to these people. And you have to judge. The reader has to judge on for his or herself. Does this seem like a fair picture? You have to trust me or not trust me. But that's a book. In other words, this is not an official. I'm not an official. I have no responsibility other than to the book itself. And so, and you as a reader have a pure choice here. Yes, this is interesting. Yes, this is informative. Yes, I get it. Or I don't like it at all, and I reject that. Your choice.
Okay, shall we go to the hand right at the back over there? Yeah.
In your view, who is it who benefits from Trump being in the White House?
Trump. I mean, I'm not sure anybody, I don't know. I mean, some people would say Vladimir Putin benefits. Maybe that's true. I mean, there are certainly a coterie of other interests. You know, the Republicans passed a tax reform bill, and they passed it because Trump would sign it. Now, as it happens, you know, Trump had very little input into that bill. It came out of a Republican-controlled Congress, so they have benefited from that. I mean, in return, they have to listen to Donald Trump call them up and berate them and belittle them and insult them. But you know, that's their trade-off.
Should go to the hand just over there.
Do you think after all of the wrongdoings and scandals that have gone on with Trump that have cast doubt on the Republican Party and what they are doing and all the things that they've had to defend about him and his presidency, do you think that there's any scenario where the Republican Party would ever turn against him and invoke the 25th Amendment or supports impeachment of his presidency?
I do very, very, very much. I mean, if the Democrats win in November, or flip the House of Representatives, and if impeachment progresses, then I think it's a new game for the Republicans, and it's certainly in the realm of possibilities that they would ditch this guy, and with actually great enthusiasm. He has not engendered loyalty with anyone.
Should move to the hand just at the front there.
Hi. What does a Trump presidency portend for the Republican Party specifically, and the two-party system in general moving forward here? Do you think it'll evolve to something different, or kind of revert to what was normal before?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that the possibilities are kind of clear. I mean, the Republican Party, there certainly are two Republican parties, and we can maybe able to argue that there are two Democratic parties also, but more clearly, there are two Republican parties, and I don't exactly know how they coexist. I mean, they manage to coexist now, actually because of Donald Trump. That's why he is tolerated. At some point I had a discussion with one of the Jeb Bush people who said that in the fall of 2015 he knew Jeb Bush was not going to win. It was a guy very close to Bush, and he said not only did he know that Jeb was not going to win, everybody in the Republican Party knew that the Republican Party was going to essentially crash and burn between then and the coming election, because the Republican Party voters had changed. Nobody in the leadership even knew who these people were, and this was partly Tea Party stuff, and partly other trends that were going on. So the whole Republican conservative establishment point of view was no longer the view of this party. They couldn't speak to these people anymore. And then this guy said, but then lo and behold, Donald Trump came along and he could speak to these people. And nobody in the established party knew how or what he was saying, and it made no sense to anybody. But because of Donald Trump, there was the possibility that they could live another day. So this is the situation that now. I mean, there's Donald Trump. There's this base out there, and then there's this other side of the party who distrusts all of this, and part of it who has come to make a devil's bargain with it. But other Republicans, and I speak to these people all the time. They were very helpful in this book. The Never Trump Republicans, who truly detest this guy and would willingly, I think, break away and start another party if they saw that Trump was going to be the standard bearer again. So, I think it's all up for grabs.
Should we go to the hand just over there? Yeah. Just there, in the blue jumper. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're all aware that a key theme to Trump's rise in presidency has been his intense hostility to the media and journalism. On the other hand, sort of the ratings, the book sales, the general fascination sort of speak for themselves. So on balance, do you think that Trump has been a good thing or a bad thing for American journalism and media?
Well, business-wise, he's been a very good thing. Craft-wise, I think craft-wise, he's probably been a bad thing. I think you've created a situation in which Donald Trump is often largely right about the media. I mean, they don't know, and I would remove any kind of agenda here and just say that they just don't know how to write about this guy. They don't know, the process of covering him eludes what the news media, the everyday news media, does. And in the beginning there was this thing in the news media: we can't normalize him. Well, effectively, what they did was normalize him, and they normalized him by writing, every day is a new tweet and a new crisis, and that obviates whatever the crisis was the day before, and so you have once again, as there was during this campaign, this symbiotic relationship between Trump, who hates the media but needs the media and works the media, and the media that hates Trump but needs Trump and works Trump and benefits from Trump. I don't think I answered your question, but that's the field of play.
Should go to the hand just further along the road, just there. There, yeah.
Do you think Steve Bannon's opinions about Trump and maybe the insights as well that he contributed for your book would have been different if he hadn't left the White House?
No, because actually he told me most of that stuff that he told me was when he was in the White House. I think he was getting ready to make a break with the White House. I mean, I kind of think, Steve had grown enormously, more than frustrated. I think it was a painful experience for him. I think that he saw Donald Trump as his vessel. I think that's Steve's language, and Donald Trump proved to be a very leaky vessel, and that gave Steve, that was enormously painful to Steve, because Steve, for whatever you think about what he stands for something. And so he was kind of working this out, and the frustration was acute. And in fact, when he kind of really blew, that evening, when we were having dinner, it just came out. It's just like a fire hose of Steve Bannon as a wounded animal. That was the night that Scaramucci got appointed, and I think that was like one of those last straw moments. And I felt almost through the writing of this book that Steve Bannon was an honest man, or felt things strongly enough that he couldn't disguise them.
I think we've maybe got time for one last question before we move on to the book signing. So if we go to the hand just over there, yeah.
With all of this chaos in the White House, what do you think of Trump in relation to global issues and international leaders? If the kind of White House you're describing, it's unmanageable. You don't want to be there, but on the other hand, you have global issues that are pressing now, and they are more important than ever. So, what do you think about that? Is the world being affected by him, and who's in charge of these, of making decisions in these global issues?
I think Trump is almost entirely divorced from any kind of global understanding and any kind of global interest. To the extent that he is willing to engage, it's on a purely transactional basis, and it basically goes that Trump will give any global leader what that leader wants if that leader gives Trump what he wants, and if Trump feels in that transaction he has gotten the better deal. But there is no context for that. There is no there is no sense of cause and effect there, of a future, and how that one deal relates to other parts of the world or moving pieces in a global vision. It's just the most rudimentary sense of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back.
So on that note then, I think that's all we've got time for now. But if you could all please join me in saying a huge thank you to Michael for joining us here today.